Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagat Gurum Pada Padme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhu. So today we will be discussing about the divine play of Sri Ma Sharda Devi. And in our previous class we saw how Sri Ramakrishna used to train her and interact with her, with Sri Ma Sharda Devi, whenever he visited Kamarpukur, or maybe she came from Jairam Bati to Kamarpukur to stay with him. Very often sometimes he also visited Jairam Bati, but that was very rare. Most of the time, whenever, till she shifted to Dakshineshwar permanently, it was mostly in Kamarpukur that she had an opportunity to be with Sri Ramakrishna. Now, one day there was a religious play in Bengal in those days, in rural Bengal. You will find the best medium of transmitting spiritual values was through religious plays, which good artists, there were good artists in practically every village, or they used to come from neighboring villages and enact religious dramas. There were a lot of dramas which were available and which would be enacted. And that was because we did not have any television or any other social media. So it was these dramas and certain wandering bowls or minstrels who used to communicate great spiritual, wonderful spiritual values and other values, other cultural and spiritual values. With the most of the people were illiterate, so this was the only medium. They, even if they did not know how to read or write, but the villagers used to hear a lot. That is why when Sri Ramakrishna was asked once that how come he never read or he never could read properly, fluently or write, then he was asked, how could you remember, I mean, how could you reproduce so many passages from different scriptures, stories and other parables from our Shastras? So he made a very interesting remark. He said, I may not have read books, or maybe even if I don't know how to write, but I've heard a lot of the stories. I've heard from the wandering sadhus, as we saw earlier, people who were on their way to Puri from North India or from eastern parts of India. They would invariably pass through Kamarpukur or Jairam Bati. And as they would travel on foot, they would very often stay in some of the places which were built for these wandering pilgrims. Most of them were monks. So when they came, Gadai never missed an opportunity. Sri Ramakrishna never missed an opportunity. The boys and girls, the young boys and girls would flock around these minstrels, these pilgrims, and sometimes the group of artists who would perform, because the village was used to provide all hospitality. So they felt that they should give back something. So there were quite a few religious groups, quite a few groups who were capable to enact such religious plays. So normally the women were discouraged unless there was proper arrangement made for them. If some of these plays used to be held under the tree, or maybe a temporary stage which was far off from the village, so the women would be, and especially the young women would be discouraged to go to such far off places. So one day such a play was being organized, and Sarada, who was very young at that time, and the other women of her family and the other members of Sri Ramakrishna's family also, other women, they also wanted to see that play. But the master said it is not good. So Sri Ramakrishna did not allow. They were a bit hurt and they were felt that why we are being deprived of such a wonderful play. The master consoled them. Sri Ramakrishna consoled them and said that he would see the play and recount it to them. So after seeing the play, he returned home and reenacted the whole show in minute detail. All the characters, he was such a good artist that he could enact, he could remember everything, all the dialogues, and he acted out the whole play for these young women who had missed out. He had also had a sweet musical voice, a remarkable memory, and a wonderful talent for acting. So he could reproduce almost anything. Once heard, he was also known as Shrutidhara. Shrutidhara means one who can recollect from memory even if he hears it once. So whatever he heard once, whether it was a drama, whether it was Ramayana, Mahabharata, even Swamiji's mother had a phenomenal memory. So though they could not read or write, whatever they heard was totally absorbed. Now most of us can read and write, but we don't understand the importance of oral tradition. Though people were not able to read or write, but that did not amount to some kind of illiteracy. There was no illiteracy in that sense, because people used to hear many things, and through hearing, the oral tradition was kept alive in India. The Vedas, all the other, even grammar was learnt. Even the great scholars, very reluctantly, they used paper and ink to put down certain things, because they believed that if it is on paper, perhaps we do not take the words seriously. We might read them, but we know it is there in our books, it is there in a written form. So we don't hear carefully. Whereas if there is this oral tradition where some of the schools, grammar schools and some of the Sanskrit Vedic schools, they prohibited paper and ink. They said no writing will be done. As soon as you enter the premises, you had to memorize all the things that you were going to learn in school or in that part, Gurukula. So that Gurukula was very keen that people memorize the entire chapters of whichever scripture they wanted to learn. And then the verses, even if they did not know the meaning, it would be memorized first and then they would be explained. So that kind of memory we could find in Sri Ramakrishna and many other talented children. So because of their wonderful, remarkable memory, they need not go to do any kind of formal learning, which was in fact introduced by the British, reading and writing. Reading and writing was, of course, it was there, but more importance was given to the oral tradition. So anyway, this led to a remarkable memory. Not only that, he had a sweet musical voice. So most of the plays had a lot of music, a lot of songs were sung to keep the attention of the people who were hearing the play. So naturally, if there is some music also in the play, then it would become more attractive. And a lot of village people, most of the teachings done, including most of our scriptures, are in poetry form because they can be sung. So they are known as the Gita. Gita means that which can be sung, not just uttered. So even Gita can be chanted in a very rhythmic way. So also the verses of the Bhagavata, Mahabharata, and many other scriptures, Tulsi Ramayana, you will find that, and whole tradition, they took so much of pains to compose these great teachings in verse form, not in prose, because it is difficult to remember prose, whereas it's easy to memorize poetry if it is sung. So he could sing, he could act out the role, different roles. He alone could do all these things. He could practically reenact the whole show, whole play. So they never missed a single detail, and The young ladies, including young Sarada, they forgot their disappointment that they were not allowed and enjoyed his performance sitting at home. Now, people generally think that a spiritual person like Sri Ramakrishna or somebody else is supposed to be very austere and serious. If he laughs, jokes, or if one is frank and free, happy and cheerful, they think it's not a sign of a spiritual person. That's the wrong idea. That spiritual persons or spiritual people are commonly associated with a lot of austere seriousness. They are supposed to be austere, they're supposed to be serious all the time, but that is a wrong concept. And Sri Ramakrishna broke that concept. People generally think that a person should be austere, serious. But Srima Sharda has recorded that she always saw her husband, Sri Ramakrishna, free, frank in his behavior, happy and cheerful. He would be very straightforward. He would tell everything, but he would tell everything, every truth with lot of joy, with lot of jokes, so that the people who heard it were not hurt by his words. He was very careful, choosy, and he never heard the sentiment of anyone. Even if he disagreed, he would disagree with some joke or some humorous story. If you see in the gospel, you will find that certain things, certain behaviors of worldly people irritated him. Though he was frank and freely he could express his displeasure, but at the same time he would sort of quote it with some kind of humor, and very cheerfully he would narrate the parables, and indirectly the people who were referred to in that parable or the joke, who were whose issues, whose problems were addressed, they would learn something without being hurt. He would not tell them on their face that you are wrong, but through the parables, he would indicate how worldly behavior leads to foolishness. One has to have a spiritual orientation in life. So, seriousness or sadness or austerity is not the sign of spirituality. Holy Mother says, she recalls that I never saw his face, his means Sri Ramakrishna's face, sad or sour. He always radiated joy. Whether he was absorbed in samadhi, you see the samadhi pose, 3 pictures we have. Most of both the photos have a smile on. He has a smile on his face, though he's in a deep trance. So, when somebody had a trance, some kind of hallucinatory trance, Swami Vivekananda said, see, if there is an expression of sadness and pain, then it cannot be a real trance. It cannot be a real spiritual experience. Spiritual experience always leads to a wonderful kind of internal joy, which is seen on the countenance, seen on the face. So whether he was absorbed in samadhi or in the company of an older person or with a 5-year-old child, Holy Mother says, irrespective of whose company he was in, never did I see him gloomy at any moment of his life. Even if when he was suffering from so much pain in the throat, very often you will find that he was his cheerful self always. So he conquered the hearts of everybody with his pure love, especially Srima Sharda, because they were all apprehensive when all the villagers spread rumors before she could ever go and meet him. He said, Sri Ramakrishna has grown, but he has grown up to be a madman. That was what the villagers spread about him. So she was a little worried because she was expecting, when Sri Ramakrishna came and showered his pure love and with a lot of intelligence, he explained to him and explained, he demonstrated his spiritual wisdom. They were all very much surprised, especially Srima Sharda Devi. So she later described how the master established a divine bliss within her heart. She says, speaking about this period of her life when Sri Ramakrishna came to Kamarpukur and she had the opportunity to be with him, she says, at that time I always felt as if a jar of bliss full to the brim was set up in my heart. It is impossible to describe the divine joy. So the joy that she experienced when in the holy company of Sri Ramakrishna at Kamarpukur, his humor, his jokes, his spiritual wisdom, everything was tinged with a lot of bliss, infinite bliss. That's why we say when we meditate on the Ishta, we have to meditate on him as Sat Cheta and Ananda, eternal existence without any fear of death or fear of any worry of death. Sat, full faith in the eternal existence of the soul, not the body. Then full faith, fully conscious or aware of what we are doing, what is going on in the world outside us. That awareness, that attentiveness, that prajna, it is known as prajna, the internal spiritual light, when it is focused on things outside, people develop a very sharp, keen sense of observation. Sri Ramakrishna was very particular. He never did anything haphazard. That is because his consciousness was 100%. Whatever he did consciously. So he was a very embodiment of Sat, eternal existence, Chit, eternal consciousness, and eternal bliss. So naturally, whoever came in touch with him would experience that divine bliss in their own hearts. It was so contagious. Just as if something is heated in the room, if there is an iron ball or a big fire, everything around that fire which can conduct heat, they start becoming hotter and hotter. Even we feel the heat, even if we are at a distance. So also this spiritual joy is highly, you can say, contagious, if you use it in the positive sense. It is highly contagious. You also feel a kind of joy, effortless joy. Effortlessly one is carried to that realm of joy. So Holy Mother says, she felt as if a jar of bliss, which is overflowing, was placed, a pot of bliss was placed in her heart. It was always overflowing. It was set up in her own heart. And she says, now even if you ask me to, I can't describe that divine joy. One has to experience it to understand its nature, the joy, the bliss. So in the evenings, Srima Sharada Devi recounts that he often used to talk to Sarada and her companions for hours and hours together on spiritual matters and also about his own spiritual inner experiences. He wanted to give his consort, spiritual consort, or Sahadharmini as she was known, a share of the spiritual joy. Normally, a wealthy man would like to share his wealth, the physical wealth, the assets, the property that he has with his wife. But Sri Ramakrishna shared his spiritual wisdom because that was his greatest treasure. So his own inner experiences, his own spiritual achievements, and all that he gained when he was alone and doing sadhana, he shared with her. Not only her, but and her companions. So he used to often tell them stories and jokes in a very humorous way and convey subtle spiritual wisdom through these stories and jokes. So after such marathon sessions, Sharda was very young, there was a huge age difference. So tired after a whole day of such housework and interactions and talk, Sri Ramakrishna, you never got tired. But teenage Sharada was very young and she really worked hard. She would sometimes fall asleep on the floor, and her companions would try to awaken her, saying, "Oh, you are asleep. You are missing such priceless words of Sri Ramakrishna." At that, Sri Ramakrishna would say, "No, don't wake her up. If she listens to everything that I say, she will not stay on this earth. She will unfold her wings and fly away." It's a very significant statement, just as Sri Ramakrishna said about Swami Vivekananda, that the day he knows who he is, his true spiritual nature. So, by giving him lot of misery, lot of uh, problems, Sri Ramakrishna somehow managed to keep him on this earth. Otherwise, he would have gone back to that spiritual world from where he came. So also, if Holy Mother, he was very cautious that she has to do a lot of work after I leave this world. After his Mahasamadhi, she lived for nearly 34 years. So she had a lot to do. And if she understands everything in spiritual life, I mean, everything is revealed to her, then she'll go back to her abode. And her children, I mean, all the people who are left behind, they would lose a lot. So he said, don't wake her up. Let her sometimes sleep so that she doesn't listen to. It may be useful for you, but for her, she doesn't need it. She is divinity herself. And moreover, if she listens, then she may regain, she may remember her own nature and merge the Divine Mother, her own nature as the Divine Mother of the universe, and simply take Mahasamadhi. So later, Sarada recalled her days in Kamarpukur. So she is giving an account in her own words. Let us see what she says. When she was a teenage girl, how she was trained, how dispassion, a kind of vairagya, and how she was trained to stay alone. You see, in those days, it was a wrong idea that women need a companion. That was the idea she came to break. She came to establish an ideal of freedom, not only for men. Moksha is not an ideal only for men, which was a false concept. They thought women always had to be dependent on men. So young girls were married off when they were very young, not even giving them a choice to decide what they want to do in life. So Sri Ramakrishna knew that, and he had come for the empowerment of women. So Holy Mother Sharda, Sri Ma Sharda Devi, when she was young, she was trained by Sri Ramakrishna in such a way who knew her mission on this earth, which was to empower other people, especially women. She would be the center around which women's empowerment would take place. So if that empowerment had to take place, she herself had to be free. She herself had to be taught that though you are my spiritual companion, though I am teaching you all this spiritual wisdom, ultimately you have to do many things after I die. That is what Sri Ramakrishna said. I have done nothing, you have to do much more. What did he mean by that? That you be independent. I will give you all the whatever wisdom is required, but don't lose your independence, either in the world or in the spiritual realm. You have to be independent. That is how he encouraged not only freedom of women in the social and the material field, where they will be equal to men in all other fields, all fields. But he insisted that they should be free, they should be independent, or they should be empowered even in the spiritual field, without having to depend on men. So, though in those days they were married off very early, as I said, because that was the common idea which was prevalent in those days, that a woman cannot live to herself. Even when Gauri Ma, as a young girl, she left her home and went as a wandering monk, as a wandering nun all over India. She went. It was a very risky thing for a woman to do, but she did it. She had also met Sri Ramakrishna before she left her home. Sri Ramakrishna must have inspired her. So she was the first nun. So also all the women who had women companions who were around Sri Ramakrishna, around Srima Sharda Devi, were also trained in a similar way. Some of them were widows, child widows. So they had to live their whole life, Yoginma and all those young women. Uh, they almost led, though they were always accompanied by Holy Mother and other women, but still they did not go back to their homes. They were practically living like recluses. Whether it was Gopal Irma, was a woman disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, was also a widow, Yogin Ma, then there were Lakshmi Didi, there were so many other women whom Sri Ramakrishna was training along with Sri Ma Sharda Devi, and so that they can demonstrate before the world that women can be as empowered and independent as men in all the fields of walks of life, not necessarily only in the worldly sense. If you have a job, or if you are can sustain yourself by working, that is one part of freedom. That is also necessary. Physical freedom, mental freedom to enable one to take one's own decisions, and finally spiritual freedom. So when the master, after her marriage, she mostly stayed in Jairambati, as was the tradition in those days, because young girls were married. Naturally, they would not stay in the husband's house. They would go back to their father's house. The marriage had taken place, so it could not be broken unless the husband died or the wife died. But most of the time, they would stay in their parents' house till they grew up, and later on, when they were in their late teens, they would go to their husband's house. So when the master visited Kamarpukur from Dakshineshwar, her mother-in-law, that is Sri Ramakrishna's mother, was still alive. She was still living in Chandramani Devi was living in Kamarpukur. It's only later when Holy Mother came to Dakshineshwar that she also came and stayed on the first floor of the Nahabat. So whenever Sri Ramakrishna came to Kamarpukur from Dakshineshwar, whenever he visited, the mother-in-law, her mother-in-law, that is Chandra Devi, Sri Ramakrishna's mother, would she would send somebody to the nearby Jairambati village to bring her to Kamarpukur. So I was then a little girl. Srima Sharda is saying, even before she had reached her teens, this thing happened many times. And I did what they asked me to do. They taught me how to serve my mother-in-law and my husband. As usual, women are supposed to not only serve the husband and run the household, but also serve the mother-in-law also. So the mother-in-law loved me deeply. Thakur's mother, Sri Mahachandra Devi, loved Sarada Devi very deeply. In the evening, many men and women of the village would come to the master and listen to his talks and singing. He would talk about God and tell humorous stories, and sometimes entertain them with a lot of singing. Sitting in a corner, I would listen and then fall asleep. If someone tried to wake me up, she herself says, the master would say, don't call her, let her sleep. So the reason, of course, we discussed earlier, that if she hears everything, she might be tempted to go back, not fulfilling the duty. Only a thick veil of Maya, Yoga Maya, which was uh, preventing Srima Sharda Devi from merging back into the infinite. So Sri Ramakrishna knew that a lot more than necessary exposure is not advisable, because in that case she would remember her true nature. So when she felt asleep and slept when Sri Ramakrishna was giving such wonderful discourses, she said, don't wake her up, let her sleep. She is already full of knowledge. She is Saraswati herself. So Sarada says she had great love and respect for her husband's family members, everybody, because they were all deeply spiritual. Although she never met her father-in-law Kshudiram or brother-in-law Ram Kumar and his wife Sarvajaya, she would later praise them. because she never met. They all passed away before her marriage. So she says, but she had heard a lot from other members of the family. So she always used to praise them. So about her husband's family, that is Sri Ramakrishna's family, she would say that my father-in-law was a very pious and spirited Brahmin. He never received gifts from anyone. Mostly those who are very staunch and highly respected Brahmins, they never accept gifts from others, from anyone and everyone. Maybe if somebody gives them with lot of love, they might accept, but generally they won't accept. So he even prohibited his people, that means other members of the family, from accepting any gift brought to his house in his absence. So in his absence, if somebody came with a gift, the family members were told not to accept it. That was the high standard he set for himself and his whole family. So that is father-in-law, Kshudiram. Though she had not met, but she had heard about this, that he was a very noble, truthful, and pious person. So regarding her mother-in-law, that is, who was alive, of course, Chandramani Devi was alive for a long time after their marriage. She says, regarding my mother-in-law, if anyone privately made a gift of food to her, she would accept it, cook it, and offer it to Raghuveer, and then give it to others as prasad. So she, unlike her husband, who was very strict, after his passing away, if somebody had offered something lovingly, she would accept, but not directly. She would accept it on behalf of Raghuveer, the family deity, offer it. Whatever was offered to her, she would first take and offer it to Raghuveer, and then give it to others who were present there. Not only the members of their own family, but others also, and distribute it. Then she says, my father-in-law used to get angry if he happened to find out about it. So even that, Chandramani Devi was very liberal, and that is why she did this. But if somehow Shudiram found out that in his absence she had accepted some gifts, no doubt she has distributed it to other people after offering it to Raghuveer, their family deity, but that was also not acceptable to Kshudiram. So he says, my father-in-law used to get angry, Holy Mother says, if he happened to find out about it. So they kept it a secret. They never told him that such and such gift was. She quietly accepted the gift, offered it to her Ishta, Raghuveer, and then distributed among as prasad among all the devotees who had assembled there, or relatives who had assembled there. So Holy Mother continues that my father-in-law possessed burning devotion. The Divine Mother Sitla would walk with him. He was so pious and so noble and so deeply spiritual that Shakti in the form of Sitala Devi, the Divine Mother, would always accompany him and protect him. He had a habit of picking flowers in the early hours of the morning, even before sunrise. That is the tradition. He would pluck flowers from the garden and in the forest and in the woods and wherever they were grown, and then come and offer it. Sometimes there was the garden of Lahas, which had lot of flowers. So one early morning, it so happened that Shudiram, that is Thakur's father, went to pick flowers in the garden of Lahas. Then a girl of say 9 or 10 years old girl, that is Mother Sitla herself, came and addressed him saying, Father, come to this side. There are many beautiful flowers on this branch. Let me bend the branch down so you can pick the flowers. He was surprised. Who is this little girl who is helping me to pluck the flowers and asking me that there are more flowers on this side? Please come here. Then he asked, who are you at this time of the day, early morning, even before sunrise? How can a small child of 9 to 10 years can come and help me pluck flowers? Then she replied, I belong to the Haldar family. He was so deeply spiritual. Haldar family means actually she used to give some excuse. The Divine Mother did not disclose his identity. Just as when Holy Mother was very small, she used to go with the brother to take a bath and work in the fields first and then take a bath in the Amodar river and come back. She also used to see 8 female companions who used to come and help her cut the crop and do all the work in the field, because she was too young to do that and complete the whole job. And the father and everybody would be surprised to see how the work was done so fast. But actually, she never knew who these 8 girls were. They very regularly met a Holy Mother when she was very young. Similarly, here also, that girl who was the Divine Mother herself, who was so much happy with the devotion, deeply spiritual nature of Shudiram, that she herself, God herself, the Divine Mother herself, came in the form of a young girl to help him. So that's why Holy Mother says he was so deeply spiritual. That is the reason why an incarnation God was born in that family, in his family. That is, these are Mother's words. So we have to take them very seriously. Now, God comes down from, they say, from Vaikuntha. All the avatars are supposed to be the avatars of Vishnu. Though other scriptures say Shiva and all the different supreme aspects of God would also incarnate. But here it was believed that God came down from Vaikuntha, the heavenly abode of Vishnu. Vaikuntha is where Vishnu stays with Lakshmi, to where the devotees call him. So wherever devotees call him, the Lord comes down. He comes down as an incarnation. So on the night of Kojagiri Purnima, the full night in autumn, the full night of autumn is known as Kojagiri Purnima. It's a day of, they believe, many of the Indian, many people in India who believe in Kojagiri Purnima and the festival, they believe that Lakshmi herself comes down from Vaikuntha. Lakshmi is the goddess of luck or goddess of wealth. Though it is wealth, it is all kinds of wealth. It is not just money, but she also gives you spiritual wealth, mental, intellectual wealth, all types of wealth. So that's why she is the she determines our fate. That's why she is also known as Bhagya Lakshmi. There are many Lakshmis. Dhana Lakshmi is one where perhaps you get money. So there are many Lakshmis. Anyway, on the night of Kojagiri Purnima, Lakshmi comes down to earth. That is, everybody believes in that. She visits and accepts the worship of those people on whom she wants to bestow her divine grace. So, in Kamarpukur, one day, my mother-in-law, means Holy Mother, is saying that her mother-in-law, Chandra Devi, once saw Goddess Lakshmi, a very fair complexioned deity, God, a girl of 14 or 15. She came in that form, and she was adorned with the earrings made of conch shells and diamond cut bangles around her arms. So with lot of jewelry, because she is the goddess of wealth. So naturally, this 14 or 15-year-old girl, whom the mother of Sri Ramakrishna, Chandramani Devi, saw, she was literally decked with a lot of earrings and gold diamond bangles and lot of jewelry. So she talked, Holy Mother says, she talked to my mother-in-law under the bakul tree in front of the house. So these were real visions, and my mother-in-law asked, "Who are you, my dear?" So Lakshmi, instead of disclosing, she said, "I have just come here." My mother-in-law, means the Chandramani Devi, asked her, "Have you seen my son Ram Kumar? He has gone to perform worship. It's quite late and he has not returned yet." She was so innocent that she did not realize this is Lakshmi herself. She was worried that her son, who had gone out to do some worship somewhere, has not come back. So she is asking as if this girl knew her son. So she is asking, "Have you seen Ram Kumar? He has gone to perform worship and has not, so late and he has not yet come." So Lakshmi just replied, "Yes, he is on his way back with his gifts. I am now coming from that house to visit your house." So that signified that It is by her grace that your son has got all these gifts from the place where he did puja, which will enable the family, which was in need of money, to somehow sustain themselves. So, but she was not after money, but she just wondered who this girl was. So Lakshmi had already come and conveyed the message that her son Rameshwar or Ramkumar was about to come with a lot of gifts. So I am coming from that house, the house where he had gone for puja, to visit your house. That was symbolic, that all the wealth that he is going to bring, whatever little money and gifts he got, is because of the grace of Lakshmi. So my mother-in-law, she still did not understand that it is a deity, it is Lakshmi herself. My mother-in-law said, "No, my child, there is nobody at home. Please don't come in now." She was about to come. Considering her to be a stranger, my mother-in-law repeatedly refused to receive her. Though Lakshmi herself wanted to come to their house, she thought it was, there's nobody there to receive you, we cannot feed you, or something like that. She said, "You go." She then just disappeared. Just see their financial condition now. It never improved to a great extent. Somehow they got by with plain food and ordinary clothing. So Srima Sharda Devi says, it is because they rejected Lakshmi. Though it did not harm them, they had still had their plain food and ordinary clothing they always had. They never suffered because she was happy with, content with what she always had. So she was not bothered to even think that it might be Lakshmi who would bring wealth and lot of money to our house. She was not at all concerned. So Holy Mother says, my mother-in-law saw goddess Lakshmi come from the direction of Laha's granaries. She also saw him in another occasion. My brother-in-law returned, and after hearing the story from his mother, he exclaimed, "Mother, you did not recognize the goddess Lakshmi who herself had come. Today is Kozagiri Purnima, the day when Lakshmi is supposed to come down to this earth, the day of Lakshmi Puja." So Ramkumar was one who could foretell things. He had that intuition. He knew what would happen and verified this incident by astrological calculation. Sometimes people were so good at astrology, they are so good at astrology, they can predict the event. So he confirmed that this was Lakshmi. Indeed, it was Lakshmi. But because of your foolishness, you denied her, did not allow her to come inside. If you had done it, we would have been very rich. But that was not necessary, or that was not going to happen. Otherwise, we would not have Sri Ramakrishna and such wonderful monks who are wonderful sadhaka or wonderful incarnations who were full of renunciation. That is because his mother and father, both were men of principles. They did not think money was such a big thing in life. Whatever little they got, they were happy and content with that. So now then they say the wheel of time is always turning. So every union ends in separation. So naturally, there was great joy, and Sri Ramakrishna lived for so many days. But somehow, after spending 7 months, which is a very long time for him, Sri Ramakrishna suddenly left back for Dakshineshwar, and Sarada had to return to Jairambati because she was not old enough to go and stay in Dakshineshwar. It was only when later on, when she grew up, that finally her father and mother decided that she should go now permanently to stay in her husband's house with her husband in Dakshineshwar. That is when she finally left. But right now, when Sri Ramakrishna returned, she also returned back to her mother's house in Jairambati. Then Swami Sharadananda writes about the transformation that took place in Sharada after living in her husband. We'll just see it briefly because we are running out of time, and continue it in the next class. What was the transformation that took place in Ma Sharada after living with her husband for 7 months at a stretch, which she had never done before? Even after marriage, it was a few days that she stayed. She was practically living independently. But what is the transformation? that really took place in that small phase of life in her life, which was hardly 7 months, but it was the turning point in her life, because Sri Ramakrishna trained her into spiritual path, into his spiritual. He trained her how one should practice spirituality, how one should conduct oneself in the world, and how one has to live an independent life without depending unnecessarily on anybody else. So that kind of freedom, the idea of freedom, the idea of independence, the idea of mm, practical wisdom which you need to run a household, everything was taught in a very meticulous way, because Sri Ramakrishna knew that she will need that wisdom, she will need that spiritual strength when she comes to Dakshineshwar ultimately. So, by the time the master left, Sardananji writes, by the time the master left Kamarpukur for Calcutta a few months later, that is 7 months, Sarda was endowed with an infinite wealth of joy. That is what Sardananji says. She was given an infinite wealth of joy and bliss in her heart that she carried back to Jairam Bhatti with her. We can easily guess that this blissful experience had effected a transformation in all her movements. She was a totally changed person when she went back to Jairam Bhatti, because all her movements, her speech, conduct, and how she worked out the spiritual ideas that were given to her in her own life in a very practical way, that is worth studying. So, uh, we can easily guess when she herself says that she had such a blissful and beautiful, blissful experience which never left her. So, how it worked on her, how it influenced her, what did she do after Sri Ramakrishna left? That Shardanji says there was a transformation in her movement, speech, and conduct. But he says, and how she worked, everything had changed in these 7 months. That was the kind of training he gave. Changed for the better, of course. But Sardananji says it is very, very much doubtful whether ordinary people who were her relatives, who were her neighbors, they might not have uh, realized this or seen this transformation, because she was now very gentle but not fickle, very firm but gentle. Firm people sometimes are very arrogant and haughty, but she was not like that. She was gentle, but at the same time not fickle, with firm faith and a kind of dignity which enabled her to take her own decisions, do what she wanted uh, wisely, of course, taking decisions very wisely, and even helping people around her to be spiritually upright, thoughtful, and very loving in nature. So she was, after this, she was not smit. I mean, her love was not blinded by selfishness. That means she loved everybody equally, not expecting anything from anybody. Now, normally, worldly love is such that when we love somebody, we expect some reciprocal behavior from them, something in some form. Otherwise, why should I love another person? That is a worldly person's attitude towards people in general, and especially in the field of loving each other. We say we love each other, we love each country, we love all types of people. But when it comes to practical life, it is selfishness which motivates us. If I have to love certain group of people, if they don't, or if they are not useful for my purpose, then why should I do that? So that is a kind of business attitude people have. Love is not selfish. That is why we suffer. We expect love in return. We give love, but we expect them to reciprocate. If they don't reciprocate, we get angry, then we stop interacting with them. So she was not like that. She was gentle, very kind to everybody, but very strong, thoughtful, and her love was not blinded by selfishness. There was no tinge of selfishness. If she loved somebody, it was for its own sake, without any expectation of return. Moreover, Her experience had eradicated from her heart permanently all kinds of worldly. This is what Sharat Maharaj is saying. Worldly desires from her heart made her infinitely sympathetic to the pain and suffering of others, and gradually transformed her into an embodiment of compassion. Kripa Mai, as it is known. Kripa Mai means one who's full of compassion. So these were the qualities, and due to the inner influence of the inner bliss which she got from Sri Ramakrishna, she neither felt any physical suffering and or nor was she disappointed if the loving care she gave to her relatives was not reciprocated. Even if she gave so much of love to Radhu, her mother, and all the relatives who lived with her, they got so much love from her, but she never bothered if these people returned that love or reciprocated. That selfishness was not there in her. So now we will conclude and we'll see if there are a few questions. Please ask. Otherwise, we'll conclude for today. Okay, there are no questions, so I'll take your leave. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.